Yep, yep. Hello, everybody. This is the IOTA Community Governance Meeting on Thursday, the 27th of July. The usual suspects are here again. Um, we are talking about governance. We are talking about what are the next steps, what are we going to do with our funds, and how are going to vote, and all this interesting stuff. And yeah, we have been talking a little bit about the progress the Treasury has been doing. I actually wanted to ask JD because you just mentioned it with the milestone stuff. How is it in general going with the follow-up of the milestones that you funded? I mean, we had also implemented this kind of process with so that you basically have one of the reviewers being one of the follow-up stuff. Is this playing out as
Yeah.
intended?
Yeah. So, the grants that have finished the first milestone are some of the first ones.
Mhm.
And so those individuals have mostly reached out to me sort of as pseudo grant manager. But actually the identity, Richard's the grant manager on that one,
Yeah.
and Yella reached out to Richard, and then Richard created a meeting. Yella wanted to be able to show the progress,
Yeah.
and it's working really good. I know. What was it? Let's see real quick. Flutter. He finished his first milestone, so he sent that to me. It was definitely a little technical. We all reviewed it. I didn't decide to, pay a technical consultant because I think it was enough between the videos to understand that,
Yeah.
he has completed what he said he was. And then some of the content creators have finished their first milestone and, of course, would like the second milestone payment, which,
Yeah.
that's probably more discussions that I have. But the process of Milestone Manager is working really well. Like I actually had a meeting and Cowie, we had two marketing proposals. So he created meetings with the committee for both of those. Both of those I happened to be on meetings with someone else. So they did recordings and they did summaries. And if one of the committee members can't make it, that's fine because we usually do recordings where we do a summary and then we do it in our Discord.
Mhm.
So it's going really well.
Cool.
I think once we have access to liquidating, then it'll be going a lot smoother because we can actually then start funding the next milestone. Several of the grant receivers just are worried that if they accept Shimmer and then they go
Yeah.
to liquidate that into USDT to pay their bills, they're going to have liquidation costs, which is totally understandable. And
Mm.
we paid Suniverse's first one of their first ones, we could only pay 15,000 USDT, and then we did 10,000 in Shimmer. And the individual receiving that actually did incur some liquidation costs that I said we talked as a committee. I brought it up to the committee and I said, do we want to cover liquidation costs in the meantime while we can't liquidate to USDT, or B, do we not at all? Or C, do we want to say, hey, we didn't necessarily discuss this with you. We'll cover, it was like a couple $100. It was like $200. We'll cover the liquidation costs this time, but any future Shimmer payment we're not going to. And that's what we decided on.
Mm.
Basically, if the receiver wants the payment now, they can accept Shimmer, but then they're responsible for any liquidation costs they incur. I mean, they may also get liquidation profits, I guess you could say,
Yeah.
but we can't be responsible for that. And
Uh,
and that's one of the reasons that we want to do USDT. It's just this unfortunate interim period that we have to deal with this special circumstances. And most people actually just say, when you get the USDT, just give me a
mhm.
call. I don't mind waiting. And
Ah,
that's
that's
kind of
cool.
what I'm trying to do, really. So
Yeah.
yeah.
That's nice.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
actually,
So
what
good.
I wanted to talk about today is basically, maybe I'll just share my screen. Um, we have this, basically last week we talked about um, uh, drafting the proposal for moving forward with the IOTA community treasury. And then I basically drafted one based on the current Shimmer community treasury specification, which is currently operating the grant committee. And basically kind of mostly replaced just Shimmer with IOTA, and updated some things. We can go through this. I made this HackMD doc where I highlighted all the changes that I did currently, but I know that also you, JD, have been working on anyway on updating the specification based on the lessons learned that you had. And so I actually wanted to wait until you got this ready, and
I
then
I
yeah,
I agree, and it's really interesting, and I think the way that I'm updating it is it actually brings up a good question. Like, so I'm trying to update it so that we have like the Tangle Community Treasury, which is currently the Shimmer tokens allocated to the grant committee.
yeah,
And then we have the Tangle DAO LLC that sort of is the legal entity under that. But I think there will be instances like it could be the IOTA treasury. It could be, the community votes on a new DAO and would like legal entity for that. And rather than paying and waiting 9 months to
mhm,
create something, they can go under the Tangle DAO LLC. So I'm trying to write it as both. One, the specification covers the Tangle Community Treasury Grant Committee, and then there's comments in the Tangled LLC, such as the purpose-bound allocation from the committee,
yeah,
from the community. So if the community decides, basically, ultimately, because the LLC operating agreement, which is the legal binding contract that the committee members have to follow. I mean, essentially, just because the community agrees on the specification framework, really there's no legal precedence that a committee member has to follow that. Of course, if it's done transparently, it'll be seen and they'll have that. But once we go and form in the LLC and we have that operating agreement, and the operating agreement says basically the specification is the ultimate
mhm,
supervising document, now they're actually legally bound. If they step outside those um, uh, boundaries within the specification, then they could actually legally be held to that and, certainly kicked out and any signing rights and whatever. So I'm trying to write it as, ultimately the foundation premise is one, that the Tangle DAO LLC committee members have to follow whatever the community essentially binds in the vote and
yep,
the specification. So, like, I'll say, um, the program lead and/or co-lead must submit a governance vote to either extend or terminate the Tangle Community Treasury Grant Committee and/or the Tangle DAO LLC.
mhm,
Because if, let's say, there's a second DAO later on down the road, the community may say, you know what, we want to keep this other DAO going, but we want to actually terminate the Tangle Community Treasury Grant Committee. Maybe it's all on-chain EVM voting and, don't need to pay people to do it anymore. However, we still want to keep the Tangle DAO LLC. So in that sense, the community through that annual vote will just simply, be done with the grant committee. Of course, there'd be a specification update for whatever DAOs are in place, and someone has to manage the Tangle DAO LLC to be able to pay the registration fee and sign documents, etc. So it's just interesting to have these two, and I think it would be good for you to see that, and
yeah, yeah. You
um,
share it with
potentially
me.
it
Yeah,
might.
yeah,
Yeah. I should be done with it. Hopefully, right now I'm just going through like grammar checks and little checks, so it's like 80% complete with the rough draft
Yeah.
I'll share it to you this weekend, and then that might be because I'm almost wondering, and I'll send you the. We could look at the operations agreement again that we have for the LLC because it's very specific to just, hey, whatever's in GitHub under the
Mhm.
specification, um, that's what the LLC follows. So even if there is a new DAO and a different type of specification for that
Yeah.
DAO, if we can word it to whatever's in GitHub, we never really have to change the
Yeah.
operation agreement,
That
right?
that was the cool move that
And
Paolo did actually. So really, whatever
yeah.
we put in GitHub, and I mean, okay, I think after 5 changes, we have to put it forward to the Marshall Islands
Mhm.
again so that they review it. But basically, whatever the community puts in that GitHub via vote is the way the LLC operates. Um,
Right. Right.
what I wanted actually to bring up, because I've been thinking about this whole thing of having, okay, we have the budget for the Shimmer tokens, and we will get access to the IOTA tokens. We have the Shimmer network, we have the IOTA network, we have voters in the Shimmer network, we have voters in the IOTA network. And as I have written it already, basically kind of my thinking was to have this separated specification for the IOTA tokens, IOTA grant thing, and the Shimmer tokens, Shimmer grant thing. Um, because like I said already last week, I think it makes sense because then we could tailor the purposes of for what grants will be given a little bit different between Shimmer and IOTA, because there will be different use cases and there will be different needs for fund spending around IOTA and Shimmer in the future. And I was even thinking about yeah, for the first thing, surely I think it absolutely makes sense to have the current committee taking the first tokens under its umbrella until basically March next year. I think we will have to put up the vote. But then I would basically think about and potentially even think that it would make sense to have potential a little bit different committee members that take care about the IOTA tokens and the Shimmer tokens. Because I was just thinking, like, the way IOTA will move is really strongly into industrial adoption, supply chain, digital identity things, and Shimmer will very, very likely be very, very DeFi, very, very DGen, very Web3. And so I think handling the IOTA tokens, and there might be grant proposals coming in from industry partners and from all kind of super crazy stuff that potentially would need a little bit different qualified grant reviewers to make really the best out of those tokens. You know what I mean? And so I think for next year, then we potentially want to open up 2 committee votes. And I think there will be likely mostly the same members in it, but maybe we even say, okay, IOTA will be maybe 2 members more that will just take care about such industry use cases. And just think about it. I mean, it could be somebody like Holger Köter or something like this, yeah, that likely doesn't want to review the 12th NFT marketplace and DEX thing. But if there is a proposal for industrial adoption coming in, um, you likely want to have somebody high qualified with knowledge and experience in this field in the grant committee. Yeah, so as a community, this was my thinking. Um, yeah, and so
Mhm.
I would I know it's like it's not about removing you guys from your thing, but I could imagine that also from the community there would be some voices coming up and saying, okay, guys, like who is taking care about industrial adoption in this in the grant committee with our tokens now? Yeah, so having
Well,
this, yeah,
this is what I always thought would be good to have technical consultants and a little bit in a sense. The current framework has, and it's something I was going to bring up later, but it has that conflict of interest. Like if someone has a conflict of interest, so, and this is tough because if someone, let's just say, is in a DeFi project, or in a sense, if we're talking industrial adoption, like Holger Karto is in Spice 5, which is an industrial adoption project that he is owner of. Now, per the conflict of interest, we shouldn't, I'm not supposed to include them as a reviewer. But the tough thing is because they're an expert in that,
Yeah,
like,
that would be
of
best
course they're
qualified,
gonna,
actually. Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So what I think I've found is, we've, I don't assign the reviewer if they're really connected to that, if their project, but I include them into the discussions because they're truly an expert in that. However, if it's a direct competitor, I then look into that and might distance them from that because, especially if there could be NDA, from one of the project. But at the technical, so I think two things. I think one, again, it should be the program lead or whatever manager of that committee should be professional enough to know, okay, this is actually a direct competitor, that individual, let's say Hogle Cartho. Let's say there's some other application and it's actually like a direct competitor and they're going to be launching. Well, Hogle Cartho shouldn't see that. Or if anything, the program lead should go to the person proposing their grant and say, hey, this is potentially going to be a reviewer. Are you okay with that? Or is there any NDA information? Is it okay for that they review this, And then it's done publicly. And most people, I've yet to see anyone try to hurt anyone else. It's generally across the board is collaborative. Everyone wants everyone to succeed, actually.
Yeah.
But I really think that conflict of interest should be, I guess, reworded because you're right. They are the industry experts and they should be reviewing it. Definitely, they should be in the discussion so that the reviewers, when they have questions, because they're not experts in it, can ask that individual.
Yeah.
So I agree there. And then the other thing I always thought of was to have this consultancy experts, subject matter experts, that when grants come in, they come in and review those because they're gonna, and generally all the reviewers, and I've had I can't remember his name. He was he a smart contract dev with IOTA and then he went out on himself. I think he's like the
You mean
fifth
Umair?
backup or the second backup.
Umair?
Umair, yes.
Yes.
Umair does excellent reviews from a technical aspect
Yeah.
and generally lays out all the information, right? A subject matter expert is going to have those skills and they wouldn't be in that consultancy contact list anyways, or a backup reviewer or a reviewer that gets pulled in. If they're not at that level of a subject matter expert, then they lay out, this is the pros and cons. This is the technical reasons of my experience. This is what I think, but here's the information. And then the review committee as a whole gets that and can make a decision. So I totally agree. I mean, having subject matter experts specific for certain grants would be a great idea. And I do agree that
we should kind of we can think about adding a paragraph or adding something about this into the specification that basically describes a little bit of process of how the committee or how the lead can reach out to them and get them in somehow. Yeah. But
and
I
and
was
because in
yeah.
the committee, the grant committee one, it says, and I missed this actually, but the reviewers should sign a conflict of interest form. And then I started thinking about, well, we don't have a form, and then should I pay Paulo to create a form, or
Take the
I
one
looked at our.
what we have from
Go
Thea.
ahead.
Yeah. we have a paragraph
Okay,
in TEA in the TEA contract.
and I don't think it's in our um, service providers contract. So I was going to look to grab that and add it,
Yeah.
or add it in there and not necessarily do a separate one. But I do think that um, I think as long as a conflict of interest is told to the program and co-lead, then that's the main point.
Yeah.
How the conflict of interest is managed, I think, should be up to the program and co-lead. I do think that if someone has a conflict of interest, they potentially shouldn't be a reviewer, but they should be involved in the discussion of that project.
Yeah.
Um, and I kind of would like the idea of, these are subject matter experts that we can bring in. And again, if we need to say, like, um, it's always transparent. When a grant is reviewed, uh, we don't say who the reviewers are, but if we were to bring a subject matter expert, we would say, "Hey, we brought this individual in to help us review this."
Yeah.
Another thing, also, as I noticed, I put a statement because today, IOTA mainnet is industry, global, corporate adopted focus, but who knows what it will be next year. But I tried to put some sentence to say, like, the grant committee of the Tangle Community Treasury um, focuses on grants that, something like that, the IOTA Foundation um, creates the vision for that network, but meaning that, hey, if it changes, you don't have to change the paragraph. Like that's the only
Hmm.
thing I wonder if we should, to some extent, try to avoid is if we write in the specification, like, we are only going to fund industrial IO 4.0 and
Yeah.
global
No. Yeah.
adopted corporate things. Because then if that changes, then you got to
No.
do a revision to the whole framework.
But
So
you
something along
could
the lines, yeah.
yeah, you could just add this. I think I even did this in my version currently. I added some stuff for in the. I basically kept the DeFi stuff, which is usual, but added some more IOTA specific things. And because
Hmm.
I was also thinking about the practical thing. So basically, what would happen next year in March, um, when the re-election is on the table? Yeah. Um, because you have two networks, you have two different groups of voters. You actually, we must create a proposal for the IOTA voters, and we must create a proposal for the Shimmer voters, because basically these are still
Yeah.
separated treasuries and separated pots, and it could
Well, and I was,
happen. It could happen actually
go ahead.
that people would like to become a grant reviewer specifically for IOTA, but I have no interest in being a grant
Mhm.
reviewer for the Shimmer thing. And otherwise, it could be that people are like, yeah, they want to be just a grant reviewer for Shimmer because they're super into Degen and DeFi, but they don't want to hustle themselves with all the IOTA stuff. So likely it could actually happen that also because the voters are different, we will have a different community, we have different power distributions. It could happen that the committees will be different setup from IOTA voters and from Shimmer voters. So, like I said, I think you will likely have
Well,
overlap, but it could happen that IOTA people vote or IOTA token holders vote somebody in the IOTA committee that is not part of the Shimmer committee.
I I think, I think, and I hope, and maybe it's hard because, like, I feel like it would be good to get the consensus from the community to present these ideas, say, like, hey, we've thought here, there's different options that we can do come the end of this committee, right? They could take over the IOTA. They could add committee members. We could have separate committees under the same LLC. We could have two different LLCs, completely, totally autonomous of each other,
Yeah, no, yeah,
and
yeah.
see what the community decides. However,
Hmm.
EVM will only really be on Shimmer, and then it's right. Like, do you do 2 votes for each network? Does maybe the community says just do 1 vote for both? It is kind of confusing. And then the other thing I was thinking about is, does this change the voting structure once we go to EVM2? Because let's just say if there is a IOTA bridge, people could potentially bridge their IOTA over in some sort of lending app, get Shimmer, go and vote on the Shimmer, bring it back, switch it back to IOTA, and vice versa. Bring their Shimmer over to IOTA, vote there, and switch it back. So, I mean, is that wrong? I don't think
I,
that's wrong, but I don't know.
I think that's not going to be possible. But just if we think about voting on the base layer, of course, clearly, whatever budget a committee would get from the IOTA treasury, it can only happen if the vote happens, if the vote for that budget or for that spending happens on the IOTA network. So you always will have to have, as soon as you want to move some funds from the IOTA treasury into the grant committee, the IOTA token holders have to decide that. Yeah.
Right.
And so you will always for if you want to refill the grant committee with Shimmer tokens, the vote needs to happen from Shimmer. And if you want to refill IOTA tokens, the vote needs to happen from IOTA. And so likely they should also have an option to vote on the grant committee, because if you just say, okay, we have there's one nomination for the next grant committee, and then but then you basically have to figure out a way, how do you count votes? Because do you allow Shimmer and IOTA token holders to do 2 votes or to vote parallel? Or do you want to force people to only vote on one network? So what happens if you don't hold IOTA, but you hold Shimmer? Um, what happens if you don't hold Shimmer but you hold IOTA, but you still want to vote for the grant committee, but you would then need to buy Shimmer tokens instead? So I think we cannot mingle things too much. In the end, we will need to figure out that we will have to have 2 parallel votes happening for the things, and we cannot guarantee that they will always come to the same conclusion and the same outcome. Yeah. So that's actually why I
Yeah,
thought.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I mean, the only thing you could do is make the poll in the IOTA and the Shimmer network, and then add it together essentially.
But then
But that's also a
then
little bit.
you would have to weight it then, because you can't
Yeah,
set one
I
Shimmer
just
and
wanted
one
to say
IOTA
waiting
token.
that
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
Well,
That's
Yeah,
I think
complicated.
if it's 50% plus 1, but I think there's to me it sounds like there has to be community decisions in a process.
definitely.
Like the first decision would be, what does the community want to do? Do they want to do a completely new LLC, potentially in Marshall Islands or another jurisdiction? And then maybe it could be a choice of 3, since we can do that. Do they want to have under the same LLC, the Tangled LLC, but have a totally separate committee, a full-time program lead? Do they want, maybe since the program lead is full-time, he can almost manage both committees, but then there's separate committees, or just have, the same committee manage both, but then they bring in consultants for specialized IOTA things, or do they just want, add 1 or 2 extra committees? So I think if we can articulate that, and then the community votes on that, then it would be much easier. Okay, what are the next steps?
Yeah.
And it's almost like we kind of need that before then we create the governance and the specification, to be honest.
Actually, this is what I did put in here. I mean, I tried to formulate this a little bit. Yeah. So, my proposal would really be to say, okay, we we make a vote or we put a proposal up for the community so that they could, first of all, decide that the current grant committee as it exists will get a bunch of tokens from the IOTA treasury that is coming. Yeah. So this is basically will go into 2 to 5 members that are already existing under the now Tangle Treasury LLC. I would never propose to set up a second LLC, which is this is kind of useless. It's kind of a it's also this is why we have
I
the
mean,
name.
I agree.
Yeah, you have Tangle Treasury. It should be the umbrella under which all kind of committees could operate in the future. Currently, we have one grant committee that is only having Shimmer tokens, but you could vote that they also get
Now,
IOTA tokens. And
I do think, and you and I, we can talk offline to just weed out all the details, but I think we need to reread the Tangled LLC operation agreement because I think we tried to say assets, but I think there is one line where it kind of says Shimmer. But I want to wait till we get the charter, then we can do a revision to it because I just
definitely we would need to update the charter for that. I think anyway, because if it's, I also think it speaks about Shimmer, and we would anyway would need to.
I think it's only one line, but what it does say ultimately again is whatever's listed in Exhibit B and Exhibit C it basically governs the operation agreement. So we could even do Exhibit
I think we would need
Exhibit
D. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, but I'm saying until we update the operating agreement, we could do Exhibit C1 Shimmer and Exhibit C2 IOTA.
Also,
but again, I do wonder. I think you'll have to look at it because I think the Exhibit C that I'm doing essentially ultimately says, and we could put an appendix so we don't have to update it every time, is basically this specification framework follows whatever the community decides annually. So if the community decides annually, hey, we want 7 members, okay, and we're going to pay them this much. That was another thing. Like in the Exhibit C specification, it says we're going to pay our members this. Well, what if the community wants to pay lower, or the community wants to pay more? Maybe an annual inflation raise, whatever. Like rather than having to then update that every time, I'm trying to write it, and you could tell me if you think it'll be good enough, and then we could present it to the community. But rather than it saying the exact number of the pay, it just says the community on an annual basis will decide, how much the program lead receives and how much the reviewer receives. So whatever the community decides each year, then that's essentially what the specification follows. Hence, that's what the operation agreement follows for the LLC. Hence, that's what the committee members are legally bound to do.
You would have to somehow have a link between the vote decision, because then actually the concrete number would only be present in the vote, basically in the votes in the nodes, basically. I think you can once a year.
So then
we can update Exhibit C in the GitHub based on the outcome of the vote, and then you have it, because then you have it in Exhibit C, written and formulated as this is the status quo for year 2024. Community has decided on a salary of blah 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 blah, and on whatever 7 grant reviewers. So every year for the vote, I would put up the new specification, which will become the new Exhibit C or Exhibit B.
But isn't it every time Exhibit C, once it's updated 5 times, then we have to update the operational agreement?
Yeah, so this is in 5 years then. And I mean, every 5 years, I wouldn't say that's a big problem, no?
Yeah, I guess that's right. If it's that way, and then we would have, so let's say IOTA was Exhibit D, then that would also fall under when Exhibit D is updated 5 times.
Yeah.
We just have to make sure they're aligned.
Yeah.
So It's not like we're updating the operation agreement this year because Exhibit C is updated 5 times, and then next year we have to do the operation agreement again because Exhibit D hits 5 times. You know, as long as they're aligned,
Because I think
it'd be
you
okay.
always will have to, you need to have the status quo in the exhibit, because otherwise you would have to go from exhibit C, and there it would be okay, the current salary for the grant reviewers you can find in somewhere external link to whatever was voted. So people would then need to go to an external source and find the concrete and correct information. I think that
See,
wouldn't
and
be so
I would
great.
just think
Yeah.
I would just think we can list the annual votes in the repository, in the GitHub repository, in the same operational agreement
Yeah, but
repository. But
I
anyway,
think to be legal
think of it.
binding, I think it would need to be part of Exhibit C, because the operation agreement says, okay, it operates under whatever is written in Exhibit C, so it needs to be written there. That was my thinking.
Yeah, we could ask
Yeah.
Paulo too. I mean, it's all the other thing that I thought about in the specification is like it's always a mandatory that everything's transparent. So let's just say the community said, "Hey, we're going to pay the program lead $60 an hour instead of $70 an hour this year." And the program lead's pissed off, and he says, "Well, screw it, I'm paying myself 70." Well, it's immediately transparent. So at that first payout, the community is going to go, "What the fuck?" You're like, "That's not what we voted on." And then again, if the specification says you can only do what the community votes, which is illegal, of course, then he would get voted out, of course. But anyways, well, yeah, I think as long as all the exhibits are aligned, then I think that would be fine, because then we'd only vote every 5 years, but we just have to vote on them together, I guess, which is what we have to do anyways, because it's two networks.
We have to definitely get everything timely and synced, and and then, like I said, it could even happen that in 2 years, whatever the Shimmer voters decide, hey, like kind of, we want to give out grants faster or whatever, we want to do something different. We want to have a different tier, and then they could update Exhibit C, Shimmer, to a different state, but Exhibit C IOTA would stay on the old state or whatever. If you have it separated, the communities can make their own decisions, because we never know how things go in the next 2-3 years. Potentially, really, the networks will diverge a little bit, especially in people that own the tokens and therefore have voting power. And you will likely, in the end, one day there will be a proposal to change something for Shimmer or to change something for IOTA, but that doesn't come through for the Shimmer token holders, and they would say, "No, we want to keep everything like it is," and the other, they want to do something different. Okay, then just change the specification for IOTA, and still everything operates under the one Tangle LLC. And then, I mean, for the reviewers, it would be just, okay, this is a grant proposal now for IOTA. Okay, cool. I have to just follow a little bit different rule set for reviewing that, or a little bit different tier for the payouts. But in the end, it wouldn't be much an issue, I think. Yeah, even if there would be some slight differences in the specifications.
Sure, totally agree.
Yeah, so I think this is something we have to somehow formulate out a little bit, and likely also, I was thinking actually to start just a normal discussion thread in the governance forum, where we just lay out those. I mean, they're not problems; they're just like findings, and then we can maybe get a little bit of discussion going in the governance forum, and put up some polls there and stuff like this. Maybe is also a good way to get activity back to the forum. Yeah. Yeah. And then basically work on creating those first phase 1 proposals, and see how they are welcomed, because we definitely need to put in the lessons learned and the things that you guys have proposed now, I think it really makes sense to include those stuff rather soonish, so over the next couple of months, instead of waiting until next March to put those new rules in place, because if it makes your job better and easier and more effective, then things can and should be changed. Yeah. So there. Yeah. So these were my little thinkings around that. Because yeah, like I said, if you think it through and you think about the practical implementation, okay, how will people vote and on what will they vote? You will always end up that for every network will always need its own votes, even if it's for the same thing. And so you will likely have, well, I never know, potential some differences. Yeah.
How does like Polygon do it? Because they have a bunch of different tokens, don't they?
No, Polygon has only one token. I mean, you have Matic, so
Okay.
you have one. They have the CK, EVM, and whatever, but it's all one token. It's very rarely.
Okay. Are there any
Actually,
other protocols that have?
I think we're the only protocol I think we are the only community that has two different networks and two different tokens. It's another special
What
thing.
about is it Polkadot?
Yeah.
And Kusama? How do
Oh,
they do it?
They completely have it separated. So this is actually a good thing. So you have Kusama tokens and you have Polkadot tokens. Kusama has also a slightly different specification for governance. They are doing things faster than Polkadot. They have different thresholds and stuff like this. So they have really different rules for governance. They also have an independent grant committee for Kusama and the independent grant program for Polkadot. And yeah, they vote for Polkadot stuff with Polkadot tokens and for Kusama stuff with Kusama tokens. They have very separated things, even if they are also very, very close communities. But of course, it's a good example. Things will move in different directions once you have two networks. And they're the same tech. This is very similar to us. Yeah, Kusama and Polkadot. There's not much different stuff. They get the stuff a little bit earlier. This is same what we are doing. Yeah, Shimmer is testing stuff out. Kusama is testing stuff out, but they have already moved in a little bit different directions from the governance. And was also always the plan, basically. Kusama was always meant to be more experimental, a little bit faster, a little bit, trying out more things. And so the Polkadot governance specifications are much more slow, more rigid. You can't get so much proposals in per month. You need much more capital locked for being a voter. And all those things are a little bit different between the two networks. Which
Okay.
I mean, in the end, it makes sense. We can't ever say that the Shimmer community is the same as the IOTA community. That was never the plan, and it will change more and more,
Yeah.
especially
No, it totally makes sense.
yeah.
I just think it like kind of like in the governance, we didn't want to get, what do you call it, vote burnout. I think as long as we think of that, because to some extent, I think, okay, 1 week we vote on this for Shimmer, and next week we vote on the same exact thing.
No, it
for IOTA.
It should be synced.
But you're right. If it's done in parallel, then that's not bad. And
still there could be
eventually there's going to be a wallet, especially if it's EVM voting, that basically you could just vote in your wallet with the two different governance applications.
You just
but it would be
just
in one
change change the network, and it should be, if you have both tokens, you just change network and can do things. But there also likely in the future will be potentially just votes that just happen on Shimmer, that just don't happen on IOTA because
Yeah.
it's a Shimmer topic. It just cares about, I don't know, which blah blah parameter or which bridge should be implemented or stuff like this, which is just like happening on Shimmer and not on IOTA, and then just the Shimmer people vote on it. Yeah.
Right.
But that's future music. Yeah, cool. Let's continue working on those things. I mean, if people are interested I posted the link for this version already in the governance channel last week. It's still up to date. Like I said, once I get the stuff from you, JD, I will
Yeah.
try to implement all those things. Especially also, you can send it to me. I'll work on the table, doing the table in Markdown from Goblin.
No, I got it all. I
Okay,
got it.
cool.
I got it taken care of.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll work on it today. I think I'll get through most of it, and then I'll put it in my GitHub repository, and then I'll send you both the HackMD file and the GitHub repository to
Mhm.
see the changes, and then we can go from there and refine. And
Yeah. Yeah, and
yeah,
then
it's almost wonder if it's worth just even like having a specification just for the Tangle DAO LLC management. Just totally separate that from the grant committees as well. Yeah, we can think about it.
yeah. So for some of those signing, company binding, finance thingy things, maybe don't
Like
isn't it
one of,
already specified in the operation agreement, or do you think it should be something more specified?
like I'm just thinking like basically the only really thing that I think would come into play is currently it's set up that the Tangle Community Treasury Committee essentially are the binding can
Yeah.
bind it, and I believe the program and co-lead can actually sign.
Yeah.
So let's just say, for instance, the community wanted the Tangle DAO LLC to sign an event-a-thon contract with some consultancy agency. The program lead would, once the vote happens from the community, the program lead would then sign. Has nothing really to do with the Tangle Community Treasury, but there needs to be this legal entity that bridges the community to the real world per se, or potentially, let's say, just for instance, the community wanted to, so you see these crazy things where the community want to buy like a Declaration of Independence, or maybe they want to buy some real estate. Well,
Want to buy
who
a
can
Formula
sign?
One race team? Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who can sign for the Tangle LLC? Because that's kind of separate. And then the big thing I think really comes down to is how do you dissolve the LLC? That would have to come from a community vote, of course. And then this is a good question. Like, does that come from the Shimmer vote? Does that come from the IOTA community?
Yeah,
Does
that's
that
a
come
good
from
question.
both?
Actually,
You
that's a
know,
good point. As soon as you add a second network, because that's also the thing with the Shimmer
yeah,
tokens, we have to add the IOTA tokens and the IOTA voters as a decision-making entity in the whole process.
members.
Likely,
Yeah.
if you think about it, as soon as you have integrated IOTA, you would have to write something like this, that for dissolving the LLC, you will need a majority vote in both networks to shut down the whole thing. Because even if Shimmer people say, no, shut it down, and IOTA people say, no, we want to keep the LLC, you have to keep it. So that's actually a good point. We need likely this specification for the LLC as an umbrella organization for whatever comes under. And then the committees are just like sub DAO things. But we likely need this mainframe above everything that regulates how the whole stuff that will happen there in the future works together, and how these binding, signing, thingy things exactly have to work. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
that's a good point.
Right. And then, of course, if we were to dissolve it, the assets would be moved back to their respective networks. So if there was IOTA assets, and then there was, let's say, layer 2 or layer 1 tokens on specific to the IOTA, that goes back to them.
Yep.
Layer 2 assets like Soon tokens and audit tokens and whatever comes in the future goes back to the Shimmer community held, and then but then legally, and I put this in the specification a few times, it's just that one, it has to be legal, and then two, enough time, and we kind of had in the other one too, but just I opened it up to all assets, and that any taxes paid to the Marshall Islands, it has to be legally and properly shut down, basically, if that choice is. We can't just because a community says send, shut down the LLC both for IOTA and Shimmer, and there's $2 million in assets. Well, some of that potentially could be technically profit. If it is profit, then we can't disperse that back to the shareholders without paying taxes to the Marshall Islands. So, as well as any contracts that we have. So let's say there was this contract with the hackathon. If there's outstanding payments, those need to be legally captured, as well as three, if I put in there, if there's any outstanding approved grant payouts, those should be finished, prior to the
and you cannot legally dissolve the company as long as there are outstanding things. And I mean, the Marshall Island even has this. I mean, all have this. I think you always have minimum 12 or 18 months. The thing needs to stay alive for any claims that will come, because as soon as you basically have it dissolved, means also there is no legal entity anymore that people could claim anything against. So you likely will have to have this thing as an in the book existing thing even longer. But this is, I think we talked with Paolo with around that. I mean, this is like you have it with all LLCs everywhere. Actually, you are still kind of legally claimable even after it is dissolved somehow. Yeah. Okay. All this lawyer talk. Why is this DAO stuff so boring? And sometimes you feel like you're working in the office for some boring government agency in a tax office or somewhere. Now I have to get the stuff done correctly. Good. Maybe we'll do that. We'll try to work over the weekend on that. I also bring this a little bit in a better form, and then I think from the structure, I think it's a cool idea. You have to think about like a hierarchical structure for these specifications. Yeah, like you said, you have the LLC main specification, which is on top of everything, and then below that, we put the Shimmer grant specification, we put the IOTA grant specification, and we can just add any other whatever idea both communities have in the future, committees or whatever kind of purpose-driven fund allotments. You can always just add single specific specification for those things and put them under the umbrella of the main thing. And then you have a nice hierarchical structure, which is kind of governed by the overarching kind of constitution. Yeah. Yeah, we can think about that stuff in the next couple of weeks. And maybe also propose this, potentially then also bring this up or include this in a vote or whatever that will come. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, having a good thought process out, I mean, since we have the time, I think a bit of time, and but also, have it ready for when the time comes for a vote, and again, trying to get as much community consensus on some of these things. I think you're right, kind of creating some discussions in the phase 1 governance to some extent.
I
might be
wouldn't.
good. I
I wouldn't
think.
do the. I wouldn't do the phase one. Just the general governance. Just basically without, because phase one would always be directly a proposal. Just having getting people engaged in the general governance category for basically. This is also why I started now putting the meeting notes in the governance forum, because I want to have people kind of use it more, and we just added it. This is also why I added it into the Sealy quests that are currently running. So we have a lot of new Trust Level 1 members now. We have a lot of new people have read what we have been doing in the forum. It was actually nice to see that they're not just going there and spending 25 minutes and clicking through 3 posts. So there are a lot of comments happening, and people basically really have read what has happened in the forum, which is quite nice. So I want to keep that momentum a little bit, and so put the meeting notes there and start to bring some discussions in that thing. Did you hear something from Linus? We should actually ask him about the moderator thing.
Yes. I had asked him back when it started becoming apparent that we'll need, I think it was 3 signers or whatever. And it just seemed like we might need 1 or 2 more. I think it's great that Andy is seems, just from what I see on LinkedIn and stuff, he's getting a lot of success, and of course he's got a wife, so that pulls time. So, but I did reach out. I know Linus has a lot Linus has a lot going on, but he certainly said, for like multi-sig sign-in, for, posting in phase 3, he's absolutely supports that. I think as long as we have, I think Werner, myself, and yourself and Overclock are pretty active in reading the comments and replying and kind of moderating to make sure there's nothing abusive or anything like that. So I think that's the main thing. But I think having, 1 or 2 people that are there as a eventually when we get to that layer level 2 to do multi-sig, as we see, with very important to have a decent amount of people that can sign, and it's just on Discord a lot, so it can respond. So I told him that once he said sure he'd be up for it, I just said, like, you'll probably reach out to him because sometimes
I'll chat with him. I'll talk with him. Should we do something like should we put this up for a poll in the forum? Say, okay, we'll say, hey, Andy is kind of too busy, and we just propose exchanging Andy with Linus, and have the people just vote. I mean, I don't think Linus is an easy choice. He never loses a vote, but I mean, he has the support in the community. But yeah, we could do that. I'll talk with Linus. Yeah, that should be a good thing.
Cool.
Okay, cool. Let's do this. Otherwise, I'll happily move myself into bed now. And hope it was interesting for our listeners here. Even if you just listen, I know you're kind of half brain following, which is good, because once we get more active, we need a couple of active people here that contribute. Anyway, we'll see you again next Thursday. I'll put up the meeting notes and the recording tomorrow morning in the governance forum. And 404 brain not found. Yeah, Werner, this is actually not true. And then we see you again next Thursday, 4 p.m., same time, same place. And thanks everybody for joining. JD, thanks a lot. See you next week. Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
See you. Bye bye.